the plot to kill the president is a very elaborate one, and Dealey Plaza is only the final statement, the actual killing of Kennedy. The plot especially focuses on Lee Harvey Oswald, who was an agent, an operative, a person who had worked with the CIA as a Marine, who was a radar operator with a crypto clearance in the Far East, who was at Atsugi Air Force Base, who then became, after his Marine career, a false defector under the direction of the counterintelligence branch of the CIA, a man named James Jesus Angleton, and who was then moved stage by stage toward Dallas and eventually into the vicinity of Dealey Plaza so he could be scapegoated while snipers killed the president. Lee Harvey Oswald was painted red by association with Fidel Castro, by his being impersonated by people who went to the Cuban and Soviet consulates in Mexico City in the fall of 1963 in his name, and who prepared a scenario which would have used the assassination of the president as the basis for an attack on Cuba and the Soviet Union. When it got to the actual crime scene, I'll just describe a little bit of it. The assassins of the president controlled the crime scene, Dealey Plaza, from the beginning. When witnesses instinctively stormed the grassy knoll to chase a shooter who was apparently behind the fence at the top, they immediately encountered plainclothesmen identifying themselves as Secret Service agents. These men facilitated and covered up the escape of the triggermen if they were not themselves the triggermen shielded by Secret Service credentials. The shooters had the official documentation of the Secret Service, and so they just walked away from the scene of the crime showing their credentials. After President Kennedy was shot when his limousine passed through Dealey Plaza, Dallas police officer Joe Marshall was one of the first people to rush up the grassy knoll and behind its stockade fence. As he reported to his superiors, he smelled gunpowder right away. He told the Warren Commission that when he encountered a man in the parking lot behind the fence, I pulled my pistol from my holster and I thought, this is silly, I don't know who I'm looking for, and I put it back. Just as I did, he showed me that he was a Secret Service agent. The Secret Service agent, in quotes, was well prepared to discourage anyone like Officer Smith who might challenge his being behind the fence where someone had just shot the president. He saw me coming with my pistol, Smith said, and right away he showed me who this was. No one had a more revealing view than did witness Ed Hoffman of what the phony Secret Service agents were facilitating and covering up. Ed Hoffman was uniquely qualified to serve as an eyewitness. He had trained himself to see more sharply than most people because he lacked one sense they had, hearing. Ed Hoffman was a deaf mute. His keen eyewitness testimony has given us eyes to see behind the fence. On the morning of November 22nd, Ed Hoffman, 27 years old, was excused from his job in a machine shop at Texas Instruments in North Dallas because he had broken a tooth. When he was driving to the dentist, he was reminded by seeing the crowds of people along the street that President Kennedy was visiting Dallas that day. Hoffman momentarily forgot about his tooth and decided to stop and see the president, who was expected in a little less than an hour. He parked his car on the broad shoulder of Stemmons Freeway just west of Dealey Plaza and walked to a point where he would be able to look down from the freeway into the president's car when it passed below him. He found he also had a panoramic view of the railroad bridge at Dealey Plaza and the area adjoining it behind the wooden fence at the top of the grassy knoll. Although he was standing beside a freeway roaring with traffic, he heard none of it. In the 45 minutes before the presidential motorcade arrived, Ed Hoffman became completely absorbed in watching the activities of two men behind the stockade fence at the top of the grassy knoll. He saw a stocky man in a dark business suit and black hat standing near the fence. In Ed Hoffman's mind, This was the suit man. The second man Hoffman observed was tall, thin, and dressed like a railroad worker. The railroad man stood waiting by the switch box at the railroad tracks, where the tracks, after passing across the bridge, ran perpendicular to the fence. Hoffman was puzzled by the fact that the two men, although dressed quite differently, seemed to be working together. The suit man kept walking back and forth between the fence and the switch box, where he would confer with the railroad man. When Hoffman sensed that the presidential limousine, which he could not actually see, was approaching, he saw the suit man walk over to the railroad man a final time, speak briefly, and return to the fence. The suit man crouched down and stood up, apparently picking something up. He looked over the fence. In the silent drama Ed Hoffman was watching, he then saw a puff of smoke by the suit man. He assumed it was from a cigarette. He soon realized the smoke had come from the firing of a rifle he was unable to hear. Hoffman saw the suit man turn suddenly with a rifle in his hands. He ran to the railroad man, tossing the rifle to him over a thin horizontal pipe about 4 feet off the ground. The railroad man caught the rifle, breaking it down with a twist. He thrust it in a railroad worker's soft brown tool bag and ran north along the tracks. The suit man turned back, assumed a casual pose, and began strolling alongside the fence. A police officer came quickly around the fence and confronted the suit man with a revolver. The suit man held out his empty hands. He then took what was apparently identification out of his coat pocket and showed it to the police officer. The officer put his gun away. The suit man mingled with the crowd of people that was coming around the fence. Ed Hoffman's attention switched to the presidential limousine as it was then being driven below him onto Stemmons Freeway. He looked down on President Kennedy's body, sprawled across the back seat with a gaping wound in his right rear skull. It looked like bloody jello. Hoffman was unable to see anything more behind the fence. A slowly moving freight train had crossed the railroad bridge and was blocking his view. Realizing he had witnessed the assassination of the president, he became overwhelmed by the need to let people know that he had seen the man with a rifle. He ran to his car. He made visits to Dallas Police Headquarters and the FBI office that proved futile. In the wake of the assassination, no one was patient enough to understand a seemingly obsessed man who was unable to speak. Witness Ed Hoffman for years followed his father's and his uncle's counsel that he keep quiet about the assassination. His uncle was in the Dallas Police Department. And then, compelled by his conscience and without his father's knowledge, he made an appointment with the Dallas FBI office to try to reveal it. And with no sign language interpreter present, he tried to give his testimony on what he had seen behind the fence. And the result of his use of gestures, sketches, and notes made up of sentence fragments was that the FBI refused to understand him, yet they threatened him. They threatened him with gestures that indicated that if he did not accept a bribe of $500, that he would be liable to severe consequences. And that was the pattern of Ed Hoffman's life for year after year as he tried repeatedly to reveal his knowledge of the assassination and received incomprehension and threats. John F. Kennedy